Here's Johnny.
I'll be back.
And you will know my name is the Lord.
I'm walking here. I'm walking here.
I'm sorry, Dave. I'm afraid I can't do that.
Groovy.
Welcome to Box Office Pulp, or as we like to call it around here this time of year, the Babadook episode. See, I got you. I was going to use the actual name, but then I didn't.
Babadook, Duke.
Babadook.
Oh, wouldn't that be Box Office Pulp guy going Babadook, though?
Babadook.
Duke, yeah, you got any money?
I'm so tired.
If it's in a word, or it's in a look, you can't delete the Babadook. Take it away, guys.
So anyways, we're here today to talk about the Australian indie horror darling, the Babadook. Joining me today, James Lewis, Mike Napier, and I'm Cody Elft. And that wasn't even written down. That's just off the top of my head. Sounded professional, didn't it?
You didn't have a thing?
I didn't have a thing. I said I had notes, not an actual, outline.
I'm disappointed in
you,
No game Cody.
Show?
I was very concerned when you're like, okay, take it away, Cody. He's like, fuck, you guys asked me to do this show.
Guide us through the fucking floor plan of your mind palace.
Welcome to the Mind Palace, and this is the closet where I keep my own personal Babadook. If you haven't seen the movie yet, it's on Netflix, it's out on Blu-ray, DVD, probably smoke signals somewhere communicating the story to your children to scare them. You can find it. And you'd be doing yourself a favor by finding this movie. It's a really interesting horror film. It's not your typical loud noises and tits. I know some people enjoy those. I personally am a fan. But it's not that.
Loud noises.
Tits and loud noises. Tits that make loud noises. It's terrifying,
God,
but I'm into it.
It's a horror movie, just screaming tits.
The tits that scream blood. Copyright?
Babadook.
Babadook. I like the direction we've taken this. We took a serious, sad, depressing, psychological horror film about depression and just made it the Babadook.
So we're our own Vivid Entertainment.
But, oh god, this went off the rails so fast. I'm so sorry.
It's the most Box Office Pulp thing that's ever happened.
Yes, it is. But let me backtrack here before all the tit jokes. It's too late. It's possible. I can't. Okay, clear my mind. The Mind Palace is being swept clear. So what drew you guys to this movie? I mean, for me, it was the fact that they weren't in a rush to get to big jump scares. They wanted to do something that was psychologically spooky, and they had a social commentary that they wanted to expand on, which, in my mind, those are the most impactful horror films.
Yes, very much.
And I'm assuming... Oh, go ahead, James.
Like I've said before, I find that with horror, the only time horror really speaks to me is whenever they try to use the framework of horror to tell a story that about something else. Like, I'm not a huge fan of horror for the sake of horror. So horror as allegory is something I'm a very big fan of.
And I like how with the subtlety and the handling of the metaphors and subtexts in the film is actually done in a really children's book story kind of way. There's a rhythmic quality to it. It's very 70s horror, actually.
Well, I like how they're kind of going against current trends here. I mean, it's a movie basically that's just a mother and her son. They don't make either one particularly likable characters until maybe like the end of the film or halfway through. So you're fighting an uphill battle the entire time. There's not a lot of death. There's just a couple of characters working through issues, and the monster is not overexposed at all. So I like all the choices they made. They really kind of embraced their budget to make something that doesn't feel cheap.
Yeah, it feels like a genuine expression rather than a series of scares, as most horror movies these days devolve into.
Mm-hmm.
The horror in the films wrapped around real life horror. Just the relationship between the mother and son is at times as unnerving as Mr. Babadook. So I think it really heightens out his presence throughout the film.
Mm-hmm. And I really enjoy the fact that even though the monster is left alive, spoilers at the end of the film, I just ruined the film for so many people. Screw you. Go watch stuff before I talk about it.
Spoilers.
The Babadook
does not die at the end. I like how in most movies that would just be a clear setup for a sequel. In this one, it doesn't feel like it. It feels like that is the natural conclusion to the film. It supports the concept they're working with, but it's a full story. This is everything in a nutshell. There doesn't need to be a Babadook 2, and it doesn't feel like they're aiming for a Babadook 2, which is interesting. Like, they're not making a lot of financially sound choices here. They're making a movie they think is interesting, and surprisingly, that works.
Studio's not even cashing in on it.
That goes into one of my favorite things about this movie, which is the fact that it has absolutely zero internal mythology.
Yes.
It's like any other movie halfway through, Amelia would be going to a professor of folklore and mythology, and he'd turn her on to some shit she wouldn't believe.
I kept expecting that scene. Like, there's going to be a library any minute now. And again,
As much as I love Sinister, I mean,
and what brings about the Babadook? Like, no, it doesn't matter. Like,
as much as I love Sinister, that's definitely something they have done. And of course, now we're going to use Sinister 2, so maybe this movie made the right choice where they just, fuck it, we're not going to go into the backstory of the monster. We're going to leave this up to personal decision if you think this is just all psychological or if there is a supernatural force at play.
Yeah, it's just a bunch of stuff that happens for no reason other than to tell this story.
Yeah.
Which is a very old school horror move.
Yeah, and like I said, it's very storybook. And the way they don't go into that is almost like it's just, you keep expecting the twist where it's all in somebody's head. And Mr. Babadook himself seems like he's born out of Samuel's imagination of what he views going on with his mother and how he's explaining her behavior and what's happening to him and all the other Oedipus stuff that's going on in that relationship.
Mm-hmm.
But it ultimately just doesn't, like, there doesn't need to be an explanation of why it's now being kept in the basement other than just reinforcing the metaphor and subtext they're going for with the film. There's no greater thing outside the camera lens.
And I feel like a lot of movies, and this isn't even just a horror thing, a lot of movies these days are kind of afraid for the movie to exist as anything other than a character arc. Like, again, there's no mythology to it. There's no world building. It's like a fairy tale. Like, it only exists to show this one sequence of events happening.
Mm-hmm.
And to make the point they're trying to make.
Yeah. I guess it's I kind of think of it this way. I really enjoyed The Conjuring when it came out. Like, I thought that was a really exciting, technically well done film. But it's not telling any important story. It's basically, hey, look, here are people being terrorized by spirits.
Just a haunted house movie.
Yeah, it's a haunted house movie, and there's a dozen of those. There's more than a dozen that come out every year, probably. Whereas this movie will stick with me for the fact that it had a topic it wanted to talk about, and it's not even subtext. They make it pretty damn clear. It's more like text, and that's fine, because they have a point, and they're exploring it, and, you know, they're raising an issue, and they kind of want you to look at that.
Well, again, it's horror as a funhouse mirror of real-life pain and real-life horror.
Yeah, I'm just thinking, like, you know, my favorite horror films, if you look at Night of the Living Dead, that's a movie that plays all around with race, or Dawn of the Dead is a movie that's looking really closely at commercialism and materialism. And yes, there are zombies and people being ripped apart, but that's almost secondary to the fact that there is a general thesis going on here that these filmmakers are trying to work through. Invasion of the Body Snatchers is just a look at Cold War fears. And The Babadook, we have a great examination of mental health and depression, all those kind of issues, and how society in general kind of gives that like a side eye. It's not a direct issue that we want to confront. It's something that kind of is hidden in the shadows.
Yeah, I thought they get a really great way of just exploring the ignorance everybody else has to anybody going through any sort of trauma.
Yeah. Like some other... Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, it's very painfully accurate to real life, where when something like that happens, everyone wants to acknowledge it for a little while and then sweep it under the rug as quickly as possible so everything can go back to normal.
Mm-hmm.
Even though there is no normal anymore.
Yeah, like the main character's sister, you know, is pretending like, oh, I've done a good job putting up with this, but it's been so many years, you just need to get over it now. Like, what exactly has happened besides the passage of time? There hasn't been any sort of healing here or anything. Every character just expects the main character to move on with her life now that she's lost her husband and is living with a, unstable child. Deal with it.
I've seen people do that weeks after a death. It's horrifying.
Yeah.
Like, it almost seems more understandable because it's been, 8 years in the context of the film or something like that. It's still kind of shitty just for the way it's presented, but, okay, it's been almost a decade, I guess. It's hard to live with that. But again, what progress has this character made? Like, there's no mental health professional helping her. She's not on any sort of medication. She hasn't seen a therapist.
And she's very much in a state of extended mourning, with, the only thing that's really moved forward in her life is just her son growing up. And even he is in a state of complete arrested development.
Yeah,
right.
It's a state of denial she's constantly in. With refusing to say her husband's name, she won't, just puts everything in the basement and won't go there to look at it. The idea of even anybody says her name, she freaks out. If she thinks about her husband, she freaks out.
Or just her son sleeps in her bed and she just, every time he touches her, she just shoves him away. Which I thought was a really interesting touch. It says so much about these characters without having to say a single word that she would, push away any sort of physical contact with her own child.
Yeah, she has a lot of very clear resentment towards Samuel and a want of not even able to accept his existence, it seems like, and that's what's giving him behavioral problems. And she doesn't want to even accept, the school wants to try to help Samuel, and she just pulls him out of school. She doesn't want to accept there's anything wrong with him and to deal with what's wrong with him.
Which I think is such a fascinating twist on what I spent the first hour thinking was just going to be another creepy kid movie.
Yeah.
It's like, I spent the first hour of this movie, I don't know if you had a similar experience, but I spent the first half just thinking, okay, this is really well written and directed, and I'm really liking it, but at the same time, this is kind of just more of what we've seen in another 100 movies. Then once you get to the possession angle, the movie does a complete 180.
Well, it's a ballsy move because they spend the first half of the movie making this kid so fucking annoying. On purpose. And then they have to twist it around and be like, okay, well, maybe we're just viewing this through the lens of the mother. And really, you now have to cheer for this kid because you see it from the other side. And it's not a choice most movies make. Like, why the fuck would you want to set up your protagonist as being someone you hate? Maybe in Attack the Block is the only other movie I can think where they do the same kind of thing. And it's hard doing that kind of redemptive arc. And the movie really pulls it off admirably.
They're each other's own monster throughout the film.
And speaking of monsters, I want to go into kind of the look and design of the Babadook, because we got something that's very different from a traditional creature feature. Like, he's not covered in tentacles or spikes or slime. He's not a Lovecraftian monster or, your vampire, werewolf, whatever the fuck you're going with. He's kind of a silly looking character, really. It's a guy hidden in shadows with a long coat and a top hat, and his name is the Babadook. Like,
Mr. Babadook.
Mr. Babadook. On face value, he does not seem like a frightening character. And I think, that really ties into the idea of depression. Like, you look at maybe the reasons why someone's going through depression, and it doesn't outwardly make a ton of sense. But to that person, yeah, that's terrifying. Or no, they can't feel certain things. They are experiencing this completely different from how the outside world views it.
It's all
and
about
when you
context.
get into Right, yeah. And you get into the film, like, the Babadook is actually terrifying. Like, when he's coming out of the shadows to possess the mother, like, it's a very, very tense scene.
Definitely.
But when she goes to the police officers and tries to describe this thing, it's just like, oh, someone left me a scary book. People are like, well, so what does that matter? They don't understand. It's not the same to them, and they don't understand it the way she does.
And it definitely helps that he looks like Count Orlok as shot by David Lynch.
Babadook is just German expressionism. It's beautiful. Like, he's clearly influenced just by old Murnau films and Cabinet of Dr. Caligari and all that.
Yeah.
Well, the fact that they...
Definitely Caligari.
The fact that they go all out to just edit him into old silent movies. And one of the scariest sequences I've ever seen.
That was terrifying. I think those were Malaise films, weren't they?
Yeah, they were Malaise. I like how that dude's movies were whimsical and cute in their day, but you look at them now and it's just this horrible fucking fever dream. Why does the moon have a rocket in its eye? This is evil.
Oh god, that moon looked like it has leprosy. Seriously, that moon looked like something was falling off of it. I was always concerned. Like, I don't want that to be my moon.
I don't want that to be my moon.
Hashtag not my moon.
Not my moon. Where's the birth certificate, moon? How do I even know you're born in this galaxy? Not my solar system.
That moon's from Alpha Centauri.
That moon's a Muslim.
Jeez.
Why do you think he's covered up half the month?
Box office pulp. Yes, we voted for Obama. Go away.
And we do it again.
2016.
What do you mean
What?
that's not legal?
What do you mean that doesn't make any sense? Okie doke.
Anyway.
On to Australian horror films.
Another thing I really liked about his design was just the sound design. Of just how unique his voice was, where it wasn't really a monster voice necessarily.
I love that it doesn't sound... Yes, exactly. I love how it doesn't sound like a voice. It sounds like something scraping up against something else that just kind of sounds like words. That's really disconcerting.
They were also on a couple of foreign posters. They really put his face front and center. It's very unnerving.
I'm against.
As am I.
Things I didn't need to see for $500, Alex.
But once again, I love the idea that him as a character is just the personification of grief as a being instead of just being a random movie monster. Like it's something that it's not just there to push a character in a direction, but it's actually about the character. And it's like the vibe in a room into a physical body.
And once again, it just feels like something that's pulled from like old folklore. Because if you look at old stories like that, the monsters you see in like folk tales and old stories, they're always very clearly just the physical manifestation of something a parent expects a child to have to deal with at some point in their lives. That's why children's books are so terrifying.
Yeah.
Like bears and socialism.
Yes.
Exactly.
To me, this movie is basically like, how can we do The Shining with less people in Australia? Like, it works on that edge of you.
So.
You watch Jack Torrance, you're like, I could understand this guy just being crazy, or is it something in the hotel that's activating his past demons? And in this movie, you get the same sense, like, okay, is it her grief that's driving her, or is there an actual monster, and that's just exploiting her grief? And you can take it either way, which is fun. But either way, it does reinforce the character. Like, that grief is definitely a part of her, so it should be a part of the monster.
I just love how just small and personal this movie gets at the halfway point. Where it's just you really are just locked in that house with those two characters. And you want to look away, but there's nothing to look away to. You just want desperately for them to cut to something else. It gives you a very trapped feeling.
It's very uncomfortable.
And just the way I'm just really taken off guard by just how accurately they represent what being in that kind of situation feels like whenever you're that age. Because if you have childhood memories of like being alone in the house with an adult who isn't fit to take care of you at the time, like that's exactly how it feels.
Yeah.
Like it really is, you're alone in a house with a monster. Like the scene where he just goes to his mom's bed and she's just in there curled up into a ball and he's hungry and she won't feed her. That's really personal stuff. That's upsetting on a visceral level. Once again, it's just a funhouse mirror version of the real horrors life has in store for people.
So what we're saying is this movie's a bundle of laughs. You're gonna love it. Bring the family.
I mean, you
Babadook. Did you open up a tall boy as you said that?
Yes, I did.
It's Miller time.
Substance abuse is the only way I make it through depression.
Hey, that's your Babadook.
Babadook. It's actually a Red's Wicked Ale, so.
But I like how you can just strip all the supernatural elements from the film and it's nearly as scary. Just based on realism alone.
Well, going off the realism, and I hate to get into like the specifics of, do you think this happened or not happened, because it's all fictional universe. But in your head, is this like an actual supernatural adventure, or do you think this is just all in the mother's head or some sort of shared vision between her and her son?
as as a phenomenon that was conjured through grief, if that makes any sense.
Like a manifestation.
Yeah.
Like in every Stephen King story, like, basically hotels are haunted just because people have lived in them.
Yeah, something like that.
Just like experiences manifest into ghosts or whatever.
Yeah, something like that.
I see it more as a fairy tale, where just this thing found them based solely on their personalities and the mother's grief. This thing sought them out. And once again, I like how in your face the movie is about what it's about without being stupid about it. There's a lot of there's some horror films that really enjoy being in your face about what they're trying to say about the human condition. And sometimes it works. Most of the time it doesn't. But they somehow strike a balance with it where you allow them to do that. Like the more you deny, the stronger I get line in the book is so in your face about what's going on, but it just plays so well that you just sit back and you want to see what's going to happen next with it.
Yeah, the thing that threw me off was just in the ending, more spoilers. So the mother and son are sitting outside and the son is showing off his magic tricks and everything seems very idyllic. And he actually pulls like a dove out of his hat. And at that point I was like, wait, hold on, what? Where did he get a bird? So I'm not sure if that's supposed to be some sort of clue that things are wrong here, or if there's actually he's just fucking good at magic. But yeah, that really threw me off.
Is Mandrake the magician? I kind of just took that as a nod to the fact that this is a heightened reality that's not 100% the real world.
Yeah. To me, it just kind of threw me off because it made me feel like, okay, maybe this is all in the mother's head. Like, in expunging the Babadook, that was like the end of her. But that doesn't necessarily make any logical sense either, because they still feed the Babadook in the basement, which, is a whole different level of commentary that she's always just going to have to live with this monster in the back of her head. And it's just, how do you cope with it?
That's what I love, though. It's not in most movies, whenever dealing with this sort of thing, they usually end on a note of, and that person got over that, and they were happy forever. Yeah. I love the idea that the movie itself is about the destructive influence of grief and by way of not dealing with said grief. But the grief has a place to be dealt with and never turned away from because that's just more destructive. That will tear you down more. So even though she thinks she's doing the right thing by that, and she's doing it in a way to even make other people more comfortable around her, she's just denying her own past, her own trauma. But it's about everything has a place, you need to address it. So sometimes you have to go in the basement where the symbolism is very clear. That's where she keeps all of her husband's things. You even see early in the movie his clothes pinned to the wall, just like the Babadook's clothes. And then she has to go down there and she has to feed and nourish her own grief and past and trauma to make everything else better.
Which is a very mature way of looking at it.
I took it in a little bit different direction where, for me, I focused more on the idea that obviously grief's a part of it, but it's not the grieving process so much as it's a person dealing with, clinical depression. And it's the idea that you will always have this darkness in the back of your head, and you will have times where it seems like it's taking you over for months. And then maybe you're good for weeks, maybe you're good for years, but it's always lurking there and you're not going to get rid of it. And it's always that monster that's going to lurk in your basement. You have to learn how to deal with it, cope with it, and understand the fact that, yes, it will never go away. So I get maybe mine is more in like a medical term where it's like, yeah, you can still medicate for it, but it still doesn't solve this issue, which to me is terrifying. Like, if you've known someone with depression, you will know that sometimes they'll be good and sometimes they will not be able to fight this monster. Like, it's just going to be there always. Yeah. You never know when it's coming back or when it's going to be gone or if it's going to switch, on a dime.
This may be me looking too far into things, but I was thinking about the fact that the Babadook is fed worms at the end, specifically.
Yeah.
So I was thinking about what that could mean, and I think there's an interesting idea there that the worms are taken. You're introduced when everything's happier. You're introduced to Amelia, tending a garden, and that's where the worms come from. The worms come from that garden, and worms have their place in the ecosystem by enriching soil and creating a hospitable environment for something new to grow from. So I feel like that's the kind of idea they're going there. They're using the worms specifically.
For me, it's if you look at a garden, everything's beautiful, but just inches underneath that garden, you have dirt, you have worms. So it's kind of like the surface may look one way, but the undercurrent underneath is totally different.
Yeah, I can see that too.
I'm not backing down, Mike.
I kind of took it
fight
as
for my right to be sad.
fight for your right to be sad.
And the rest of the song is just weeping, like 3 minutes of the Beastie Boys just weeping. That's my favorite remix. Followed by Intergalactic.
But I think I took the worm thing in maybe a more crude and literal sense. As
An ode to Pink Floyd.
yes. But I kind of took that as just more of a childhood thing of like, okay, there's the monster in the basement. What do you feed it? Worms, because that's what monsters eat.
I mean, logistically, where's she going to keep getting these worms from? She pulled a lot out in one day. If you have to do that every single day, you're going to run out of worms. What if it's winter? I don't know how that goes in Australia. Maybe the ground gets cold.
But it kind of, I felt that like kind of played into something you see a lot in the third act, which is things being brought down to a child's point of view. I mean, he uses monster fighting gear to try to battle the Babadook at one point.
Very true. Several points. He's always got his monster fighting gear.
Yeah.
It's like something out of the Goonies. Which was a red flag when I first started watching the movie. I'm like, oh god, the kid is making a monster fighting catapult. Boy. And I'm glad that did not turn out as shitty as I thought it was going to be.
But yeah, it's kind of, that's how I interpreted that, because it is very much how a very small child would view someone dealing with darkness. Like, you take the monster and you put it in the basement and you feed it monster food.
I think maybe that's a better way to say it. Maybe instead of trying to specify this in terms of grieving versus depression, maybe just darkness. Like any sort of mental illness in any term whatsoever. Like mental unease would be a good way to describe what this character is dealing with, however you want to come at it.
What we're saying is Babadook is the feels.
Yes.
Yeah, I would say that.
Yeah.
Before it gets too late, I wanted to talk for a minute just about how amazing Jennifer Kent's direction in this movie is.
Oh, yeah.
Very sure-handed. A lot of confidence. Which is impressive because what else has she done? Anything?
I think some short films.
Yeah.
I know
there's one on the DVD, but that's, as far as I'm aware of.
Yeah, she is a talent I am desperately looking forward to seeing more film from, because she is, like, with this one movie has cemented her as a fucking rising star in the horror world.
Yeah, she doesn't direct like an amateur or a newbie or anything. There's a lot of confidence here. The camera doesn't shake around. It doesn't cut things quickly. She's willing to drag a shot out. She's got the confidence to take things slowly, which is really impressive. I know so many directors can't do that or won't do that, or because of their budget, they try not to, and she just goes for it wholeheartedly.
Well, what struck me the most was the fact that she does something which I've seen a lot of other projects fail at, which is intentionally edit the movie to be disorienting.
Yeah.
You see this a lot, especially in the first act, where it always cuts away like a few seconds before it's supposed to cut away.
Mm-hmm.
And there's lots of smash cuts to loud noises, not for the sake of a jump scare, but just to throw you off base.
Yeah.
There's a lot of missing establishing shots, so you're not quite sure where you're supposed to be. I coincidentally just watched the first season of American Horror Story a few weeks before watching this, where they try the exact same thing, but it doesn't work at all, and it just leaves you feeling dizzy after watching an episode.
Yeah.
This is that same philosophy done expertly.
It really is. And there are parts where it's disorienting, but it's on purpose, and because it's saved, you realize the effect so much better than if they just bombard you with it. Like, when the mother's in the car and she thinks she's seeing the Babadook, like, you feel the unease because you're seeing it from her point of view. Like, you actually understand what her point of view is and how confused she is. And if they'd filmed the entire movie that way, you would not get that. You wouldn't understand that this scene was special.
Yeah. And just the scenes with her dealing with her son where he's screaming and the camera's cutting to 100 different things and you as a viewer can't think straight. It really puts you in that perspective in a very effective way.
It puts you in the mind of the character.
Because if you've ever been in that situation yourself, being around a really fucked up kid who is just destroying everything it is one of the most disorienting experiences you can have as an adult.
And on the flip side, I like how she shot Mr. Babadook very plainly whenever he was, really on screen. Like there wasn't a lot of movement. Everything was very still and kind of stoic. Like the final confrontation, there's not a lot of movement. He's just there. There's all sound and very slight movement on the character's part. Mm-hmm. But the camera's not doing anything to be like scary things. It's not.
Yeah, it's just the stark shot of him walking towards her and scraping his fingers against the wall is fucking terrifying.
Even when she's in the police station and sees, his outfit and fingers, hanging from the coat hook, it's like it wasn't been, like it just, you happen to see that while the camera was pointed at it.
Yeah, there's not a dramatic sting from a violin.
And a quick zoom.
Yeah, and it's far more unsettling for that. Because I like it in movies treat the horror as you can't look away from it. Too often they're moving all over the place. It's the reason why the only movie that's ever really scared me was Ju-on. Because they just sit the camera down and then those characters are just on screen doing whatever they're doing. The camera's just in a master shot, and you're watching it. And there's no way you can look away, or there's nothing to divert your attention. The camera's not whipping all over the place.
Yeah, it's very Polanski-like in that way. It's like just, here's life as it's being lived, and something horrible is happening in the background.
For some reason, The Others really scared me as a child. Now I feel like that's a dumb thing, because I'm pretty sure not that much thought was put into that movie.
The Others is good.
I haven't seen that in a while.
I haven't seen it since I was a kid. Terrified me then.
This movie is such a great example of why there needs to be more women in horror and just how distinct a female voice is in such a male-dominated genre. Because there's so much interesting stuff that's played with in this movie that no man would ever think of. Like, can you imagine a male writer and director thinking of the masturbation scene? Like, no, that's specifically something only a female director would have pop into her head.
Yeah.
And just the birthday party sequence. My favorite fucking subtle gag in the entire movie is whenever you get the establishing shot of all the little girls in their pink tutus dressed identical, and they leave the room, then it cuts to their moms, and they're all dressed identical. That fucking destroyed me.
It's a very unique perspective on horror that I think is really needed in many ways, because there's only so many psychological tropes you can go with over and over again before it wears out a little bit. Yeah,
I've noticed female directors in horror and female writers seem to be very good at doing that thing where there's humor, but there are no jokes, which is something I really love in the horror genre, but you don't really see many good examples of. Because you either see movies that have a stick up their ass and have no sense of satire or irony to it, or you see joke horror movies. But while this movie's not exactly a laugh riot, there's a lot of very, very subtle.
I've been crying for the last 40 minutes.
Even, again, going for, the entire birthday party sequence is really, fucked up and disturbing, but there's also, kind of a smirk to it where it's so over the top.
You do want to see that little girl fall on her face.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Also, was her nose made of glass?
Yes. Don't you know that about little girls? They're made of glass.
Oh, this got disturbing.
Oh, just now.
Hi, everybody. So, in closing, the Babadook. Go see it.
Babadook.
Do.
Thank you, I was waiting for that.
Box Office Pulp says, if you see a book, any book, in your house, burn it.
Burn it. It doesn't matter if it's Fahrenheit 451. Burn that twice.
Can I say, I love how Mr. Babadook used tape.
Yes.
to rebuild. Like, I want to see that scene of him just hunched over in an alleyway, putting the book back together.
Oh man, gotta make this pop-out event way more interesting. What can I do? Blood spurts out of her throat. There we go. I need some red paper.
I'm still really pissed that I didn't learn until after watching this you could have bought that book.
Really?
And
There was a Kickstarter. You can get the entire book.
yeah, it was like signed. It was like $80, but it would have finished like all the way to the end, so it had extra story to it.
Yeah.
It sounded fascinating.
I was really happy. That whole project got funded. They got more money than they expected, which made me really happy because that's how horror should be marketed. There's a niche audience that's very interested. Exploit them. Make stuff they really want. Aim it directly at your audience, and they're going to support you.
Yeah.
I'm happy because, sorry, I'm going to keep cutting you off here because I got one tangent I want to run through. I've been polite most of the other time. It's really cool because this movie actually came out on Blu-ray and DVD from the Scream label. And if you know anything about Scream, they're responsible for re-releasing like Day of the Dead or John Carpenter's films on special collector's editions. And they put a lot of care into these movies. They get different special features. They're not just slapping the movie out by itself, maybe a trailer for a special feature. Like they actually care enough to go through and give you like reversible cover art, or the version I have has like a mock slipcover that looks like the book casing for the Babadook. And when you open the slipcover up, it's actually a pop-up of the Babadook.
Yes, I've seen that. That looks amazing.
It's very cool. It's very cool. It's only like $2 more than the regular Blu-ray. And it's still like $15. And I love that. Like there's a niche label that's really doing everything they can to please the fans. So if you see a Scream anything, just go for it. They probably have your best interest at heart, and I want them to keep making cool shit. So give them your money, please.
Box Office Pulp recommends giving Scream Factory your money.
Or Kino, because I mean Kino's got some cool stuff too.
Kino's pretty amazing.
They are.
Real quick, I just want to pitch the idea for the Babadook 2. It takes place on a college campus, a fraternity house, the Babadoosh.
Yes.
The Babadoosh.
Douche. Douche. Douche.
If it's in a keg. If it's in... If it's in a popped collar. If it's in a keg. I don't have a rhyme for any of that.
Something roofie.
Something roofie. The most terrifying college experience you could ask for. Douche.
It's that kid growing up in college. Oh, God.
Don't make me spit beer out. So, I think that's all we've got to say for tonight. Thank you for joining us. If you were interested in this podcast for some god unknown reason, you can find more of us at our blogger page, boxofficepulp.blogspot. I think that's right. I don't know. We're also on iTunes. You can find us on Facebook. We don't have MySpace. Don't look there. That's dumb.
I wish we did.
Yeah, we could. I mean, it's still around. We also have several other podcasts that you're going to enjoy. There's Below the Bible Belt, and there's Pulp Nightmare. Both definitely worth the time. Anyone else have anything to plug? Anything? Like a new brand of underwear or like a soda you really enjoyed? Just throw it out there.
I'm drinking generic water.
Oh, crisp Evian.
I thought you just said Chris Evans. I was very confused. And remember to visit pulppodcastnetwork.wordpress.com, where you can find all the shows from the Pulp Podcast Network and all the links you need to subscribe.
One of these days, we're actually going to sit down and record that whole outro, and then we won't have to say it every goddamn time, and it won't have me mess it up.
And be sure to check out the latest episode of Hercules versus the Podcast, which will be uploaded by the time this comes on.
Oh, yeah. If you don't, I'm going to personally break into your house and feed you a Babadook.
That's horrifying.
Hey, as executive producer, I have to take drastic measures to make sure people watch this excellent piece of programming that they're going to enjoy whether they like it or not.
Just a can of Babadook. You spoon feed them. No, eat it.
Not even a spoon feed. There's a funnel. I just jam it.
I just fucking walk into my house and James is there holding a knife and he's just sliding across the floor to me. Oh, like, oh God, Cody, what have you done?
He didn't watch his own show. So anyways, go watch that podcast or I will find you and then ask you politely to watch it. And then things will escalate from there. Good night, everybody. That's a wrap.
And like that, he's gone.
Dun, 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 dun.
Boobadook.
Dun, dun.
Why'd the dog have to die?